What's going on out there? It's your boy Tahir Johnson, and we're back with another week at the Cannabis Diversity Report. This week, I have my homegirl, Caroline Phillips, in the building, the founder of the National Cannabis Festival. The National Cannabis Festival is the largest cannabis-focused event on the East Coast, but it's also special to me because the National Cannabis Festival pitch competition was, I'll say, where I kind of really got my start in getting into the industry. Caroline, tell us a little bit more about you, the festival, and how you got started in the industry.
Well, thank you so much for having me on today to hear. I'm a big fan of National Cannabis Industry Association and everyone on your team. You all have been incredibly supportive to National Cannabis Festival over the past 5 years, and we really appreciate it. I am here in Washington, D.C., where I founded the festival 5 years ago. I grew up here in the D.C. area and came back and went to Howard here in the D.C. area, so we have that in common. But I founded the festival 5 years ago because when Initiative 71 passed in D.C., we saw all of these big conferences coming into the city run by people coming in from out of town. And I ended up working one of these events. And I went to it and I looked around and I really didn't see any people at this event that looked like the folks in my community and looked like a lot of my friends who I knew were interested in finding avenues in the legal industry. At the same time, I had a couple of friends who were working in drug policy, and I started to talk to them about my observations and my concerns about legalization as it started to unfold around the country. And we came up with this idea that maybe Washington, D.C. could use an event that was affordable, approachable, and more accessible for all people. So National Cannabis Festival is sort of like a rock the vote event for the cannabis community. We really pride ourselves on providing people great entertainment, but also great information and educational opportunities through the program.
Absolutely. And I think that's definitely one thing that I've always loved about it is that it not only is it true to cannabis culture, but very much true to DC culture. Like you have like Backyard Band is, regular performers right there. And so it's really DC. And it also, like I said, it was one of my first times actually being exposed to like the greater cannabis industry as well.
Your story is one of my favorite stories that come out with this whole festival. Getting to meet you, but then getting to meet your mom also, and seeing you all have that first sort of, showing her the potential for the industry and why you're passionate about it was something that I will not soon forget. So It was great to meet you that way, and then to see you doing this work now was really terrific.
Yeah, and that was super cool because like one of those pre-events that you had was literally like the first time I literally told my mom there that I was going to quit my job like in finance to be.
I think you told a story, the story slam about this, right?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
The story slam, and that was like literally it. And then so here we are now off of that. But one of the things that is super interesting that I think a lot of people don't necessarily know about, I'll say every time friends come to visit DC, they ask about our cannabis laws. Initiative 71 was passed in 2014 and went into effect in 2015. For people that don't know, could you talk a little bit about like the cannabis scene in DC and what the, like the laws and what it's like?
Yeah. So Initiative 71 is legislation that made adult use cannabis in DC legal, not recreational sales, but adults over the age of 21 are allowed to consume cannabis in their homes. It allowed for home growing and, of course, our medical cannabis community that we have here in DC. The flaws that people have uncovered in Initiative 71 over the past couple of years, well, there are quite a few. Number one, it doesn't really offer a vehicle for recreational sales, which is something that a lot of people in the city want. But it's also because we're restricted. DC is under congressional budget control, and we've basically been told that if we move forward with recreational adult sales in DC, that Congress will punish us and will remove money from our budget in different ways. I believe they even threatened to arrest our mayor if she were to move forward with her plans to create a regulated system in our city. This has also brought on a conflict of sorts between our medical community. These are folks who have invested a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of energy and dedication to building licensed medical dispensaries and cultivation centers in DC. And then our aspiring entrepreneurs, some of whom operate in the unregulated market in our city. So, I think that for me, Initiative 71 really opened a lot of people's eyes to the potential for the cannabis community and also industry in our city. It also opened people's eyes to the lack of access for a lot of people. And a lot of the people that we're talking about having a lack of access in DC are folks that come from lower income communities. And a lot of those folks are Black and brown people in our city, the same people who have been arrested for cannabis at a rate far higher than white community members here. So Initiative 71 is complicated for us. While it has given a lot of folks the freedom to explore cannabis business and to explore ideas that they have, it's also forced a lot of us to hit a green ceiling, as I like to call it. I know that advocates in DC are really hoping that in the coming year, maybe 2 years, depends really what happens with Congress, that DC can move towards a fully taxed and regulated adult use program in our city. I also know that advocates are very concerned that when that does happen, those opportunities aren't available to just a small few people. Like, they want to make sure that we have different kinds of licenses at different levels, workforce development programs, and different avenues for folks to find ways into the legal industry. So it's still a difficult conversation, but it's something that we're finally talking about out in the open. And I think that we'll hopefully find solutions to with a new Congress and with some determination from folks like you and National Cannabis Industry Association.
Absolutely. And, I definitely think that that is very important that as these opportunities in the industry is growing and created, that we do have opportunities for people from these same communities of color that have been harmed by the war on drugs to actually have opportunities to participate. As we look at, the East Coast in general, like the cannabis industry really here is potentially growing. We have New Jersey with legalization on the ballot. What do you think will, what do you kind of see as a prediction, happening, with East Coast? How do you think that the industry will grow here over the next couple of years?
So I think I should start by talking about what I know about the West Coast. I don't live on the West Coast. I live in DC, and I visited the West Coast, a couple of weeks here and there over the past few years. And I'm always struck by the scale of the industry and the size and maturity of the companies on the West Coast. The depth and history of cannabis culture out West is so different than it is here on the East Coast. On the West Coast, there are things like the Emerald Triangle, the sort of like mythical, lauded region that grows all of this amazing cannabis. We don't exactly have that on the East Coast. Our relationship to cannabis on the East Coast, to me, is much more steeped in the damage done by the war on drugs and the difference between those who have and those who have much less. So I believe that, and we try and communicate this through National Cannabis Festival, but I believe that the cannabis culture on the East Coast is going to develop a lot more around advocacy and awareness of the war on drugs and the damage that
we will start to see some of these more regional, smaller companies grow into larger multi-state operations on the East Coast. I'm hoping that as we do that, these companies can all be really aware of what advocates have been concerned about with legalization and ensuring social equity and making sure that cannabis businesses play a role in correcting, the past issues around the war of drugs and how that's damaged so many communities. So I do think that the clamor of advocates on the East Coast is a little bit louder. And I think that's because we've had the opportunity to see what's happened on the West Coast, to talk to advocates out West, to talk to people of color who are aspiring entrepreneurs on the West Coast who've said, I haven't been able to get a chance to get in. So using both the advice and wisdom of folks on the West Coast and then what's true to us on the East Coast here, which really is advocacy, I think that we have a real shot at really building some models for legalization that could become blueprints for other states.
Absolutely, and I think we actually do. Like you're correct. We have a lot that we can learn that we've already seen from our colleagues on the West Coast.
Yeah.
And I know that advocacy and policy is actually a big part of what you do at National Cannabis Festival. And I love the fact that you kind of, you put some medicine in there with the candy. So while people are coming for the concert, they do end up leaving and understanding policy and advocacy a little bit better. And I know you've had all types of speakers, from members of Congress to all different types of policy experts. Could you talk a little bit more about the Policy Summit and some of the different conversations that take place there?
Absolutely. So a couple of years ago, about 2 years ago, we realized that festival was going great. People were having fun. We were getting lots of more left-leaning politicians and policymakers to show up and speak from the main stage. But we were having a little less luck with the more conservative lawmakers. And we realized that perhaps inviting lawmakers to speak in the middle of a field at a festival was not necessarily everybody's comfort zone. So we decided that we could create another format to get these messages out, and also another format to get us closer to our ultimate goal of providing free information and education to people. So we founded the National Cannabis Policy Summit 3 years ago now. It's a free event. It's open to the public. And we like to think that the Policy Summit is a convening of unlikely allies. I know that we can go to cannabis conferences and see our friends and colleagues speak from the same page, tell the truth and tell it to people straight. I wanted to experiment while we were in DC with trying to get some folks that you might not ordinarily think support cannabis policy reform or criminal justice reform to come and speak. So, maybe folks that we don't necessarily see eye to eye with on all issues. This year at the summit, we had a great panel. It was called The Conservative Case for Criminal Justice Reform. We had Grover Norquist on it from Americans for Tax Reform. He's an interesting guy, and folks have really strong feelings about him. But he does understand criminal justice reform, and he does understand how cannabis legalization can benefit and impact that. We also had a Democrat lawmaker, Congressman Lou Correa was on that panel, along with someone from the Koch Institute. So it was really interesting to have these three minds come together, approaching this issue from different angles, but all with the same general outcome that cannabis must be decriminalized, and there has to be a better way for us to approach drug policy in America.
Wow, that definitely sounds like an interesting panel. And like you said, all different sides and opinions all coming together to share an opinion on one topic.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, and it was interesting to see it all done in the digital format this year, which I know is something that NCIA has been working on, especially with your big conference coming up. But it's still really exciting to see these conversations happening. And I think it's important to maintaining the sense of community while we're living in these strange quarantine times.
Right, absolutely. And I mean, like you said, we've definitely had to pivot ourselves, moving to the Cannabis Business Summit, which was going to take place this summer. And now we're doing it next month in November with our keynote speakers, Andrew Yang and Carlos Santana. But like you having a festival, right? You've had to move that also this year. What was it like having to pivot during COVID, and what are some of the things you're doing to kind of maintain your business right now?
So, I think we can all think back to March. And when I think back to March, I think about how innocent all of my thoughts and ideas about COVID were, what I thought was going on. One thing that folks should understand is that planning something on the scale of the National Cannabis Festival, we have about 25,000 people attend. It's a full year process. So when my team had to pull the plug, we'd been working 11 months. We pulled the plug about a month to the day out from the festival. Postponing a festival is almost as much work as putting on a festival. I'm sure that the NCIA events team knows a lot about that. There are a lot of messages you have to get out to people so they are comfortable and confident in whatever the plan is. So it's been really hard. I like to joke that I'm now available to be a cancellation consultant for people because I feel like I have a pretty good checklist. But no, that was an incredibly hard adjustment for my team. One thing that we realized as soon as we had to postpone the April festival was that we had a lot more to lose than just the festival by not doing something in April. We'd spent 11 months working with our team, paying contractors for design, paying Facebook for ads, all of that fun stuff. And to let all of that go to waste just didn't sit right with us. So we immediately pivoted and put on the High Stream 420 fundraiser, which took place on April the 20th. So 2 days after the original festival date. I think it was one of sort of the first festivals to go online of its kind. It was an adventure and we learned so much. But we also raised $14,000 and distributed that among 3 nonprofit groups. So that was a good feeling for us. And I think it helped give us a bit of confidence moving forward that there is a way to take the live experience and translate it in the digital world. It's not the same. I think we all know that. And I think anybody watching, any business owner who is looking at doing events in the digital space should talk to a lot of people as you're doing it. The things that I've learned that are interesting are about a lot of our attention spans right now. So we learned that shorter, more concise programming is better. And yeah, we also learned that a lot of speakers and viewers are getting a bit of, Zoom exhaustion. So how to really program interesting conversations to keep people engaged. But it's been an interesting year of pivoting. We have our election night show coming up on election night, of course. So that will be our last live stream for 2020. And then hopefully we'll be looking to the second half of 2021 for some live events.
Nice. Speaking of elections, the MORE Act was potentially going to be voted on in the House earlier this year. What do you think about, and I know from your perspective on policy, what do you think about the MORE Act and its chances of potentially passing? Should it come up for vote eventually?
I would like to be very optimistic about it. I've talked to Michelle on your team and Queen with Drug Policy Alliance and Justin with NORML. And I think the votes are potentially there. I do know that, back in September, there was a lot of discussion about whether it was appropriate while we're in a pandemic to really be focused on anything but that. I hope that in the past 3 months, lawmakers have learned a bit more and come around to consider that cannabis is also a medicine and come around to understand there are chronically ill patients who need to be able to access this medicine. And there are adults in the United States who are looking for an alternative way to relax and ease some of the stress they're under, and cannabis can help with that. I hope that lawmakers look at the MORE Act for what it really is, which is something that addresses so many social ills in our nation far beyond cannabis legalization. Cannabis legalization, the side effects of prohibition are the things that are addressed by the MORE Act. We're offering people opportunity. We're offering people the chance to have their records expunged, a clean slate, a new industry. So I hope that lawmakers, as they consider the MORE Act in November or whenever after that they might bring it up for a vote, look at this as a bill that can offer economic recovery, it can offer health care to people, and it can offer some much needed relief to our whole nation right now. So I hope that we get a chance to look at it bigger picture. I would love to see it come up for a vote in November, but I just don't know if that's going to happen. Yeah.
And, I love the fact that, a lot of what you're doing is breaking down the stigma that people have around cannabis. And those are the things that, kind of help to move the movement forward, right? You've had these mainstream artists that people love and know, even ones that are I guess you could consider cannabis artists and even some that aren't.
Yeah.
What are some of the favorite performances that you've had, of the people that you've interacted with and that have performed in? And then who are some of the people on your dream list to perform in the future?
So I think they've been with us every single year since we started, but the Backyard Band is probably always my favorite performance. They mean so much to our culture in DC. I grew up listening to the Backyard Band from when I was too young to be able to sneak out of the house, even to go to shows. till when I was allowed to go and see them at the local high school to as an adult. Seeing the way the crowd responds to them and the way they tailor their show to our audience is really powerful. And also seeing the way, as cannabis has come mainstream, so has go-go music come mainstream. So it's really just interesting to see how go-go music is helping shift the culture of our city into a more inclusive space. For the more well-known acts, I would say that, I mean, there's so many. I really enjoyed Ludacris's performance last year. I could tell that he was having so much fun. He was talking to people who were sitting on the porches at their house. For anyone that hasn't attended National Cannabis Festival, we're a big festival, but we happen to run on a street that's right next to a neighborhood. So the neighbors will come out and sit on their porches and watch the show all day. So he was actually going back and forth with them, and you could tell he loved it, and he just really entertained our crowd. Future hopes, well, I'm looking forward to next year's show for sure, where we'll have Method Man and Redman and Young M.A., and we're bringing in Antivalis this year, which is an amazing, eclectic group of artists, just make beautiful music. And then future for folks we haven't booked yet. For music or just a conversation, would love to talk to Killer Mike. I would love to get him involved in our program some way. Of course, I'd love to have him perform, but I'd also just love to have him speak and help educate our fans, because I really believe in the power of music, not only as a version of oral history, but as a way to educate and influence people. And we see that every day in our society. And having mainstream acts like Ludacris acknowledge National Cannabis Festival and acknowledge our community, that means a whole lot. That guy's also on Fear Factor, like, come on, that's a big deal. But yeah, I mean, it means a lot when these artists come out and when they understand why they're performing. We make sure that they understand why they're performing. It's not just a cannabis consumption festival. There's a jail less than a mile from where our festival takes place. And there are a lot of young Black, brown men and women who are sitting in that jail for the exact same reason that we're at RFK celebrating. So we make sure the artists know that. And, I think that when they come and perform, they can appreciate the experience that they're having too.
Yeah, there's definitely been some dope lineups, man. I was looking forward to Method Man and Redman for sure. And Killer Mike, that would be crazy, because like you said, he could be on the policy summit and perform. So Killer Mike, if you're listening,
if he could pause and do a keynote in the middle of his performance.
Right.
Just,
Yeah,
put the podium out.
Right. But one of the things that is that is interesting. One of my favorite moments I have to tell you about from the festival 2 years ago. I had Dr. Sue Cicely. I was out with her on the yard while Backyard was playing. So I got to introduce her to Go-Go for the first time. And she was listening to it like, what is this? I like this.
That's so great. That is so awesome.
Cool. Yeah, so Dr. Sue's a fan of Go-Go. That was my favorite moment from the festival.
It is fun seeing all of our cannabis industry friends from around the country come to DC and have that moment of now I can say that I know what go-go music is. Mm-hmm. But I have to tell you, one of my favorite things to do in the couple of weeks after the festival, where I'm trying to decompress and, recharge to get ready to start planning all over again, I'll late at night go on YouTube and watch attendee generated fan videos. It is so much fun seeing this event through the eyes of other people. And it brings me so much joy to see different kinds of people meeting each other with different kind of experiences around this plant. So I really appreciate that you've been part of that for the past couple of years. And I appreciate what NCIA has done to create the space for something like the festival to exist, because we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for all of the work of organizations just like yours.
Hey, I definitely appreciate that. Definitely. And, one of the things that is interesting, we have to uplift people like you that are being creative and starting new different businesses. I think often, especially for people of color, as we look at opportunities to get in the industry, we're often thinking about, everybody thinks, oh, I have to have a dispensary or I have to be a grower or something like that to get in the industry. But you've carved out a lane. I mean, doing entertainment, festivals, right? Something people do a lot in another industry and tied it together. like what type of advice do you have for people that want to get in the industry? Like what are some things that they should think about, from your experience?
I would say think about what your core competencies are. What are you great at and what do you love doing? And then think about what's missing. What's missing from the cannabis community, cannabis industry experience for you? And is there something that you can do that can help fill that gap? A lot of times, especially with things like National Cannabis Festival, nobody knew that we needed a festival in DC until we had one. So, that was a gut feeling that I really had after working that first conference after cannabis was legalized in DC. I just had this, feeling in my gut that was like, there has to be a better way to make this more accessible to people. I think I might have the skills to make that happen. So it's hard now because there aren't as many events to attend, but it's also easier now. You can get on your computer and experience multiple different kinds of cannabis events a day. You can go to the NCAA conference next month online, look around, you can network with people. And while you have your notebook next to you, you can literally write down what you think is missing. So I would encourage people to really look within what they're good at and figure out what your skills can do to help fill a gap. And then don't be in too much of a hurry. Sometimes the best things that happen are the ones that build slow. It took me 1.5 years to make the first National Cannabis Festival happen after the initial idea. I ended up having to cancel the initial date because I just couldn't figure out how to make it happen. So the best things take time, and also sometimes they take more than one try. So stick with it. If you're passionate about it, it will work out.
Absolutely. That's great advice. Hard work, perseverance, having that vision. And I always say, if you can make it through Howard's A building, you can make it anywhere. And I know that you have. Before I let you go, I know that you have also a very broad educational background. But you're a Howard alum like me. So could you talk a little bit about that experience? I'm very big on trying to promote our HBCUs and tell folks about the opportunities there. Could you just talk about a little bit about that experience of attending Howard and how it prepared you, for your career professionally?
My experience with Howard is both unique, but I think that a lot of students that go to Howard come from unique circumstances. I'd spent 3.5 years at a school in North Carolina that I'd struggled for 3.5 years to pay for. Struggled enough that I had to miss semesters of school here and there and just be working to try and get enough money to get back into school. And even when I was in school after trying to work to get back in, it was difficult because I couldn't afford the meal plan or the books. So I was just paying all of this money to try and negotiate around all of these other challenges. And by the time I hit what should have been my senior year, there weren't options for me. I'm also an immigrant. So at the time I was not a US citizen, so I was not eligible for financial aid. The only thing I could do was work side jobs, and try and find bank loans, which no 19-year-old should be doing. That's a terrible thing. So by the time I got to senior year, I'd exhausted every option. My university had done all they could to help me. They created an emergency relief loan to try and help me, but it was really just getting to the point of without books, how can I do this? I was an English major, so the books were important. So I ended up coming home and not going to school for a semester. And it suddenly occurred to me, I'm up the street from an incredible school. And I'm in state, in DC, because Howard had at that time, I don't know how it all works now, but they had an in DC rate. And it was the smallest fraction of what I had been paying. So I went down there and I enrolled, and I applied and they accepted me, and I saw that I was going to have a chance to finish college. I wrote back to my university in North Carolina, and they very begrudgingly allowed me to go forward with this process. Howard is an accredited university. I just have to say that before I share this detail. They said that I could go to Howard and get the credits to graduate, but they required me to go to each professor and prove that they had a PhD, and then send those credentials back to this other university.
Wow.
To say that I was embarrassed, I knew it was wrong. You know, this is like, I was young still. I was like, this doesn't feel right. Like, I'm in an accredited university. I shouldn't have to pull the credentials of my teachers. I like to think that my teachers had some wisdom in what was going on and didn't give me a hard time for it, and all offered up their credentials. I'm like, so embarrassing. But yeah, I had an incredible final year and a half at Howard University. I met really great people. I was able to fulfill parts of my identity that I was not able to do at this predominantly white university in North Carolina. I learned a lot about myself, but also being an immigrant that moved to the United States, I learned a lot about African American culture, which is not something that I was gaining at the school in North Carolina, where African American culture was very much, you know, on the sidelines. So the Howard University experience to me was very special. And, you know, I would love to be able to go back and take more classes there. I'd love to encourage every young person I know that if you don't enroll there for 4 years, at least go to a summer program. But like, you should check it out. You should have experience. But I know that your experience at Howard was really enriching, and that you even ran the whole Cannabis page, which I think you still have, right?
I did.
Yeah.
That you know, Howard definitely left an impression on me, and I think like you, the biggest thing that I took away from it is the community, like the professors. Like you said, in your experience, they were like other parents, right? Like they looked out for us and cared about us so much and made sure that we made it. And I think that experience, even if just briefly, can have an impact on you that can help to you know, help you feel empowered and go on to do great things. So
Right.
always love for HU.
Well, we need to figure out how to get an active chapter of Students for Sensible Drug Policy at Howard. I heard it was happening, or something happening there. But I think that they need a great group on campus that talks about drug policy.
Absolutely. Well, that's something for us to work on then after this.
Yeah, for sure.
It was definitely a pleasure getting to rap with you today. I appreciate you, and I'm definitely looking forward to linking up with you and being back out at National Cannabis Festival next year when we pop back off.
Absolutely. I cannot wait. We'll have to get you on the stage as one of the judges for Cannatank, the entrepreneur competition that you were once a contestant in. Yeah, this has been really nice. It was great seeing your face, and I look forward to seeing you in person sometime soon.
Yes. I would love to come back and judge the Cannatank, so count me
in.
Awesome. All right, so I'll see you later, homie.